Hello all. Just a couple reminders before we start that I put into the chat. Our spring conference is in Minot on May 9th. So if you haven't registered yet, there's some information on that with a link to register for the conference and more information about the conference. And then also a reminder that if you aren't part of our Prairie Communicators Facebook group, that feel free to click on that link and join that group. And we are very excited today to have Marty Dahl and Raquel Strand present on behalf of AE2S today regarding the project that they are working on with carbon capture and communicating that throughout North Dakota. And as you know, it's a it's a I think challenging uh, thing to communicate. So I look forward to hearing all their great ideas and how they put this together. Marty has 20 years of experience working in government communications, in community engagement, and community and economic development. And then prior to AE2S, he worked as a community and economic development director for the city of Victoria, Minnesota, and also as a communications and community engagement director for the city of Burnsville. So he's no stranger to communicating economics with different groups and all that. We also have Raquel with us today, and Raquel has dedicated her career to bringing communities together, sharing unique stories, and brainstorming short and long-range opportunities for success. And her experience with media relations, public sector communications, and marketing helps organizations share their authentic stories and showcase initiatives in a way that connects audiences to each other, to locations, and to ideas. Prior to joining AE2S, Raquel served as a communications manager for Burnsville and Fridley. And she has more than 20 years of experience as well in communications, engagement, and marketing. So we are very excited to hear from them today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marty.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to try to get my screen shared here. All right. Hopefully everybody is seeing that now. So this project that we're going to talk about is has been under development for about 18 months now. And so we're looking forward to taking some time out today to kind of share the process that we went through, pulling this all together, some of our lessons learned, and then showcasing some of the work that we've done to date. So just real quick again, thank you, Jennifer, for the introductions. I'm Marty Dahl. I'm the communications practice leader here at AE2S. For those who are familiar with AE2S, we are an engineering consulting firm, but we're a little bit unique in that we have a communications group that's kind of embedded within that engineering team. So we do support communications for a lot of engineering specific projects, but we also do direct communications consulting with primarily government entities, and that's this project is one of those projects as well. And I don't know, Raquel, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think we summed it up. We can just dive in.
Right. So before we jump into the specifics of this project, I wanted to play a quick video that will hopefully provide some background on CO2 and why North Dakota is talking about this and why they care. This is actually one of the videos that we created as part of this project's creative library, which we'll talk about a little later in the presentation. But I hope it gives a really good high-level summary about why this is even a topic of conversation.
We hear about it, we read about it, but what exactly is CO2? CO2, or carbon dioxide, is a colorless, odorless, non-flammable gas that naturally exists in Earth's atmosphere. It is produced by humans when we breathe and when organic matter decomposes. It is essential to our environment, needed by plants and crops to grow, and is used in everyday products such as fire extinguishers, and to put the fizz in our carbonated beverages. So why is CO2 such a hot topic? Here in North Dakota, we are proud of our agriculture and energy heritage. They've shaped our landscapes and communities for generations, but today they face challenges and opportunities, and CO2 is at the center of it all. Burning fossil fuels like North Dakota lignite for electricity or using North Dakota corn to produce ethanol generates CO2. As federal regulations on CO2 emissions continue to evolve, our coal, biofuel, and gas industries must find innovative solutions to continue to meet the state's and country's important energy and agricultural needs. One of those methods is underground CO2 storage. Using this method, these industries can capture their CO2 at its source, transport it if necessary, and store it permanently nearly a mile or more underground in secure rock formations. The result? An effective way to reduce CO2 while still supplying clean, efficient, baseload energy and producing sustainable biofuels for generations to come. Learn more about North Dakota's CO2 future at carbonnd.com.
So again, hopefully that gives a very high level overview of why these CO2 initiatives have become a topic of conversation in North Dakota. Another item that wasn't mentioned in that video, it is communicated in some other videos that we've produced for this project, is the potential for enhanced oil recovery using CO2 to actually inject into some of our existing oil wells to be able to push more of that oil out of the ground than can be done traditionally today. So a lot of things that potentially impact North Dakota's energy and ag industries, which are so important. Oops, didn't advance that yet. So the state of North Dakota identified that carbon capture and storage provides a potential solution, again, for some of the challenges faced by our baseload energy industries to be able to compete in low and no carbon markets, meet those ever-changing regulations, and again, for the potential of future enhanced oil recovery. They also, as part of that, identified that there's a lot of confusion, some misunderstanding, and fear about CO2 industry and about the CO2 industry and what it does and those potential impacts. So in early 2024, through an appropriation from the legislature, the North Dakota Industrial Commission awarded a grant to develop an education and outreach strategic plan and a library of creative materials to help provide information on the topic of CO2 in North Dakota. Those funds were appropriated from the state's 3 energy research councils, the Lignite Research Council, the Oil and Gas Research Council, and the Renewable Energy Council. It was issued as an open RFP, and AE2S Communications was one of 2 firms that interviewed. We actually interviewed in a joint setting of all 3 of those research councils, which was the first time all 3 of them had ever gotten together as a full group. And we were ultimately chosen as the lead consultant on this project. Now, the last 2 notes on this slide are 2 of the key points of emphasis that have really helped us cut through some of the noise surrounding this project. And they really, relate to one of our first lessons learned, that really be clear and consistent about your scope and desired outcomes of a project, especially if there is some controversy surrounding it. For us, this project really from the get-go, we emphasized it was not about any specific CO2 related project. Everybody on this call is probably familiar with the Summit CO2 proposal and some of the controversy and issues that are related to that. This project was really purposeful in that our outcomes and the deliverables that we would be providing would be about explaining what CO2 initiatives are in general, identifying and explaining the safety regulations around the industry, and explaining the potential economic benefits that CO2 could have in North Dakota. Again, we wanted to be really clear that this was not advocating for any specific project proposed or active. Secondly, this project was scoped specifically for the development of a strategic plan and the creative library of materials to support that plan, with the intention that once this is complete, the Industrial Commission, the Research Council, the state would have to determine if or at what level they want to invest in implementing the plan going forward. This is sometimes a challenge for us, even with our internal groups, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but needing to reiterate that our project was not necessarily the implementation of this. It was really the development of here's the plan, here's the tactics and goals, and here are the materials that you can use to push that plan forward. So I mentioned earlier, this was a very large project spanning a year and a half, and we needed some help. In addition to a ton of in-kind support that we received from Industrial Commission staff and other branches of the state government as we worked through this, we also partnered with 3 other entities who worked as sub-consultants on the project. Western Dakota Energy assisted us in some of the political discourse that was related to CO2. The Fieldstone Group helped us with some outreach and engagement. And Threefold, who we recently brought on, is in the process of creating some additional video assets for that creative library that we're developing. We also received a lot of support in the form of information gathering, reviewing materials, consultation, checking for accuracy, helping provide guide rails from a number of other organizations within North Dakota, including the Ethanol Council, the Lignite Energy Council, the Petroleum Council, the Economic Development Association of North Dakota, NDSU Extension, and probably most importantly, the Energy and Environmental Research Center, EERC. They kind of served as our QA/QC throughout this project to review, to make sure that things that we were producing were accurate, they were scientifically based, and again, that we weren't misstating things. So they were a great partner.
As Marty mentioned earlier, AE2S, our company, is founded in engineering. And even though our communications division does a lot of work outside of engineering, we are used to projects that have a lot of complex information. As this strategic plan really has more puzzle pieces than any project that I personally have ever been a part of. Not only was it controversial, but it also had a lot of technical and scientific concepts with the goal of helping audiences across the state gain a baseline understanding of CO2 initiatives and access to trusted resources. And as you all likely know, this is a heavy lift within any given neighborhood or community. And we were asked to do that, come up with that strategic plan to reach across statewide demographics. And then you throw a newbie into the mix. So I joined the AE2S team when the project was already underway, about 2 to 3 months in. So not only did I miss those early project and partner conversations that are so important, but I'm also a Minnesota native and came into this project with very little knowledge about CO2 pipelines or storage or the conversations happening in Western North Dakota. I'd never even heard of Summit. So I had to re-educate myself on a lot of things, including the basics, the difference between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So I had a rather intense education deep dive into a topic that I really never thought I'd be a part of.
So I mentioned noise earlier. For those of you that have been following along at home, CO2, particularly the one large proposed CO2 pipeline and storage project that I mentioned earlier, has been pretty controversial. So we saw a lot of media attention right off the bat with this project. You can see some of the headlines here on this slide. So even before we were ever brought into the project, it was already being talked about in the Bismarck Tribune that North Dakota was going to be providing $300,000 to boost this. Once it was recommended, that was a news story, and also the other side of the critics that see it as government lobbying. And then even when we got to the point of starting to release some of our materials, again, that became a news story. So another lesson that we learned here was that you really need to have some tough skin and not take these media stories personally. And to be fair, most of the traditional media coverage was pretty balanced and pretty fair with messaging on both sides. But with traditional media, we also saw some of the other, if you want to call it new media, blog type coverage of this campaign. We had one entity in particular that is not a fan of CO2 initiatives. And you get some of these a little looser headlines and stories about propaganda and re-education and calling foul and these types of things. So we also had to kind of work through some of those things, and sometimes they get a little bit more attention than they maybe deserve, but something else we were always keeping tabs on. But actually, one of my favorite moments of this entire project thus far actually came from an article that came out from this group. It's another one of my lessons learned, that you can always find positives to hang your hat on, even in the negatives. So when we presented the draft plan late last year to the Industrial Commission, this entity wrote a story, a blog article about it. And you can kind of see on the slides here that we got a lot of praise actually from a strictly political consulting standpoint, and I am not being sarcastic. This is really well done from a development standpoint. $300,000 is probably a bargain on the open market these days for a comprehensive campaign plan. It's a great template to copy for anyone looking for a solid example of how to put together a professional campaign. So we, again, I picked the strategic lines out of this to show there was other things that were more critical, but we actually felt pretty good about that even one of our biggest opponents was like, hey, I don't agree with this project, but the outcome of the project is actually pretty good work. So because we started out with a lot of eyes on this, we wanted to make sure that we were really clear on our objectives, our deliverables, and our desired results for this initiative. We wanted to identify those and put them in writing early, with our objectives really being we want to promote and maintain open communications and idea sharing. We want to provide opportunities for outreach and engagement. We're going to develop a strategic education and outreach plan for use by the state or its partners. We're going to develop a creative education and marketing collateral in a variety of formats. And then we identified our key deliverables for this project were that plan, the materials, and then being kind of a conduit to address questions and concerns. All of that ultimately with the desired result of the state of North Dakota to have a feasible plan that they could use going forward to provide ongoing outreach and the tools that they would need to do that. Another thing that we did early on in this project was pull together an executive team. We pulled this team together shortly after kicking off the project last spring, and we met monthly with this group through a majority of the project timeline. The team was really well represented across a variety of different industries and practices and expertise, and they really were invaluable for the feedback that they provided and the guidance and kind of helping prioritize things. But I'll chalk this up to another lesson learned. It was a really large group. That list on the right-hand side of kind of some of the representative entities. There were more. There were also multiple people from these groups that were part of these conversations. So I'm sure everybody's heard the phrase before, too many cooks in the kitchen. Sometimes for us, it felt like we were cooking 3-course meals for a 500-person wedding party. We had a lot of cooks. So we had to work really hard to find the right path and with consultation with the Industrial Commission staff to make sure that we could balance the competing directions and guidance and priorities that we received from our full executive team. So we had our team in place, our steering committee was pulled together, we were monitoring media coverage. Now it was time to really dig in, starting with our research and discovery phase. I'll preface this, and Raquel alluded to it. I myself was also not a CO2 expert by any means prior to the start of this project. No one on our staff was. So we had a lot of learning that we had to do on the front end, and we actually spent a good portion of the first few months just learning about all of these things related to CO2. So we did during that time frame. We had discussions with stakeholders, impacted parties. We attended educational sessions. We reviewed existing materials related to CO2 capture and transportation and use, a lot of those things that had already been produced by the EERC. We reviewed meeting notes from past town halls to try and understand all the questions and concerns that were being raised. We spoke with state officials, representatives from counties, and again, worked really closely with the EERC to really try to educate ourselves on what this all means, what is it, how does it work, and what are the questions and concerns that are out there. As part of this research and discovery phase, we also established a public feedback forum on the project website at carbonnd.com. We'll talk a little bit more about the website when we get into our creative library, but the website was stood up pretty early on in the project to provide some base level information and really to be a landing place to provide an opportunity for just general public feedback. This is still out there. It is still live. It's still being monitored. You can go to carbonnd.com today and click this right at the top of the website and provide feedback. But we really, again, wanted to have that as a way for people to be able to express their concerns or questions, so we can make sure that we're addressing all these items in the plan and the materials we're pulling together. As you can probably expect, that feedback varied from the extremely negative to good questions to, believe it or not, even some positive feedback related to these types of initiatives. But again, we thought it was really important to make sure that we were able to provide a conduit for anybody to be able to provide that feedback. So once we felt like we had a good grasp on the information, the questions, the concerns, the history of CO2, we began putting together our CO2 education and outreach strategic plan. Through our research and discovery and our ongoing meetings, we identified 3 key outcomes for this project. The first being creating a better understanding of CO2 and North Dakota's role in these initiatives for the general public. To do this, we wanted to provide factual information backed by trusted resources and experts. We wanted to build trust and really reestablish a base of trust as it relates to these initiatives by listening to concerns, answering questions, providing clarity. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the goal of this plan is meant to preserve and enhance the North Dakota way of life by helping people understand how CO2 affects our important ag and energy industries and how those industries really are essential to maintaining that North Dakota way of life. So working backwards from those desired outcomes, we developed our 5 project goals. Those included providing factual information and crafting messages that speak to multiple audiences, establishing reliable sources of information, creating that library of branded materials, providing that opportunity for feedback and questions, and providing clarity around CO2 regulations, industry challenges, economic impacts, etc. We also developed, as part of the early stages, these 6 key themes that you see on the screen, that all of our messaging recommendations related CO2 would kind of tie back into one or more of these themes. The first being safety. That was probably the biggest topic or point of concern from people out there that are talking about CO2. And the people in North Dakota really have the right to ensure that these initiatives are not going to endanger themselves or their families or their livelihoods. So our educational information would have to address the risks, explain how those risks are mitigated, highlight the regulations and monitoring around this industry, emphasize North Dakota's priority on planning and research and technology. The second key theme was natural preservation. There were a lot of questions related to, well, isn't CO2 necessary in our atmosphere and for the growth of plants? How is it going to impact water and soil and plants and animals if it's stored in the ground? So we needed to create educational information that would address the state's unique geology being suited for deep underground CO2 storage, and that storage underground doesn't impact these things like water, soil, animals, plants, etc. on the surface above. The third key theme was federal regulations. Really, regardless of anyone's individual belief in climate change or the impacts of CO2, the reality of the world that we're living in is that there's stringent federal regulations for reducing CO2 emissions, and there's market demand for lower no carbon products that place pressure on our energy, our biofuel, and our ag industries. So again, we wanted to create educational efforts that highlighted how capturing and storing CO2 benefits our state's baseload energy industries by allowing them to continue to compete in these markets and regulatory environments. The fourth key theme, landowner rights. I think we all know and respect that landowner rights are extremely important to North Dakotans. So we wanted to make sure we included educational components that explained what the easement and compensation processes were, and really highlight that there's not an intention with any of these initiatives to take land ownership away. The fifth theme was North Dakota pipeline and CO2 history. I know myself, I wasn't aware of this till we started working on this project, and I bet that there's a lot of people on this call who maybe even today aren't necessarily aware that North Dakota has actually been doing some of this for more than 20 years. We have 3 active CO2 storage projects taking place in the state today, and there's 2 active CO2 pipelines within North Dakota. One of them that's been sending CO2 to Canada from the Synfuels plant by Beulah for more than 20 years. So providing some education around the history and kind of demonstrating that this isn't new to North Dakota. We've been doing this for a while. And then finally, that last key theme of economic impact. We've talked a lot about how these regulations and low CO2 markets impact our important energy industries. So we wanted to make sure that we had educational information that talked about what the potential economic impact is for those energy producers, the potential benefit to corn producers from increased ethanol production, and the ability to potentially extend the life of North Dakota's oil fields through enhanced oil recovery.
So let's dive into messaging a little bit. As with any communications project, key messages were a big part of this project and a bit complex in themselves. Taking everything we learned throughout the discovery project and through their discovery phase and through those early conversations and engagement efforts, we created 3 key messages as the basis and the foundation for all messaging moving forward. 1, you're concerned about safety. We are too. Safety is our top priority. 2, our core energy and agriculture industries are key to the continued economic success of our state and local communities. And 3, your landowner rights are important and respected. So due to the complexity of CO2 initiatives, it was really important that we took time to kind of simplify things to these 3 messages on safety, economics, and landowner rights, but also to tailor them in a way that people could receive them and understand them across demographics, which led us to the research and development of personas. That is what you see here with Educator Jason and Farmer Jack, and in my opinion was one of the most interesting parts of this project and the most fun. So how we did that, we used Esri business analysts to research North Dakota demographics in general, and also to take a deep dive into the 5 counties that were most impacted by potential or current CO2 storage and pipeline projects. Esri has a tapestry segmentation system, which classifies all U.S. neighborhoods into 67 unique market segments based on socioeconomics and demographics. For example, prairie living is a common one in the Midwest rural areas, and certainly across North Dakota. These 67 segments are then grouped into 14 general, what they call life mode summaries. And from there, in pairing those 2 categories together, you can glean significant information about purchasing trends, lifestyle characteristics, technology use, and even how people in certain areas generally prefer to communicate or where they receive their news. And all of this information is paired with what we learned during the discovery phase and in those community conversations, and used to develop personas, or a profile of a typical resident that might be our neighbor or someone we see at the grocery store. These personas help us understand commonalities in specific regions, and then we can craft messages that speak to those individuals in a more tailored and personal approach. In total, we created 13 personas to reflect the audiences that the Industrial Commission was trying to reach. We then worked with AI to analyze these personas compared to our research in specific counties and the concerns and questions that had surfaced in certain areas to really dive into lifestyle and values and develop tips on how to best communicate with these audiences. Was it very detailed or was it high level? Was it in face-to-face interactions or group settings? Is it best through mail or email, or do they like social media? From there, we created outreach tips and tailored the key messages stem from those core 3 of safety, economics, and landowner rights in a way that would be most effective and easiest for each persona to understand. And the goal here wasn't to change anybody's mind or opinion on their stance of things, but simply to make sure that they had access to accurate information.
So we had our who, we had our what for this plan. Next kind of came the how. How are we going to recommend that these key messages be provided to key audiences and hopefully meet the desired outcomes? So another lesson learned here, we needed to try to keep things simple. As Raquel mentioned earlier, there are so many puzzle pieces and complexities when it comes to CO2 initiatives and the questions and concerns related to that, that we really wanted to try to simplify things to the extent possible in the materials that we were developing. So our creative department developed several pieces of collateral that would be able to be used as part of implementing this plan. And each piece that we created, we really tried to be specific to a singular theme. We oftentimes create multiple variations of that same material related to different themes, but each piece we wanted to try to keep focused on one theme of our key themes and key messages to try not to overcomplicate the message that we were trying to deliver. And while we understand that most of our audience segment would only want to consume kind of high level, easy to understand, big picture messaging, we also understand that there are people out there who like to dig into the details. So we also wanted to make sure that all of our materials would drive people back to the carbonnd.com website, where we link out to all of that more technical information, the reports, the studies, kind of the scientific backing behind all of these things for those that want to dig deeper. And so the next couple of slides, just want to give a snapshot of some of the creative library materials that we pulled together. So first, I've mentioned a few times the project website at carbonnd.com. In addition to the feedback forum, which is front and center on the site, we also included information on understanding CO2 and what North Dakota's role is in it, the history, why North Dakota is uniquely situated to be able to potentially take advantage of these types of things. We also wanted to talk about the history and the active projects and things that are happening in the state to, again, try to give background information that these initiatives aren't necessarily new. They've been happening for a while. And then also wanted to touch on some of the safety aspects that we mentioned in our safety theme. And again, drive people to additional information, some of those reports, studies, and things if they really want to dig deep into it. And then we also have a place on the website that has FAQ documents that we'll talk about in the next slide. But really, again, identifying some of those key audiences and their key questions and trying to answer those. So again, I mentioned our handouts and FAQs. We developed a number of handouts, but kind of the key piece of these were these FAQ documents. They all live out on the website right now if anyone's interested in taking a look at them. But we created 5 different variations, one more general for just general audiences, one geared toward landowner questions, one geared toward policymaker questions, one geared toward emergency manager questions, and one geared just towards safety and some of those questions related to safety. These are also available in print format, so they can be taken and used with one-on-one conversations with people or at events by anyone who wants to be able to provide that information. We also created a number of print and digital assets, a little bit more graphic heavy. The idea is that these could be used in digital advertising if there was a campaign push. They could be used on websites. They could be used in presentations to kind of try and, again, connect those key themes of safety, landowner, and economic opportunity. We also have a number of flyers and posters and event boards that were created as part of this project. Again, each of them geared toward one of those specific themes that can be used in a variety of different ways. We've created some mailing pieces that could be used to mail out directly to audiences. Again, this is just one example, but we've got different variations for the different themes and audiences who you might want to reach out to upon implementation of this plan. We also developed a number of articles, talking points, blog content, really just narrative related to this and these themes that can be used in print and digital newsletters or online and blog posts or social media, what have you. And then we've also developed a media and press kit so that upon implementation of this project, there's information that can go out to the media to kind of explain what's taken place over the last 18 months, and then really give them a snapshot of here's where you can go to find additional background information about what the intention of this all is. And then I mentioned earlier, and we showed one, we also did some video assets. We have a couple of other animated videos that are created on different themes. We're working with Threefold currently to do another video that's related to safety and economic benefit that we're hoping is going to be completed in the next month or so. And then kind of one of the more recent components to this project, we also have done a radio campaign. So Scott Hennon, for those who are familiar with him, media personality, long time in North Dakota. He's a part owner of the Fieldstone Group, who is one of our partners. He's actually doing a weekly radio program called The Carbon Conversation, where he's bringing in different guests and experts to talk about CO2 concerns, opportunities, etc. And all of these episodes are available on the website as well, if anyone's interested in taking a listen to those.
So how Marty rephrased it as several items in the Creative Library. Obviously, it's a very comprehensive library of materials, meaning there's a lot of stuff. And it also included a couple elements that had their own unique challenges. So this is one of them, was the education lesson plans. The executive team wanted to introduce these topics into educational settings, namely grade school, middle school, and high school. So now wrap your head around how to do that without showing bias to any side of the conversation, not to mention how to introduce these highly complex topics to kids and teens. So for each of the grade categories, we created a 2-day lesson plan. Day one was the educational component that included discussion, defining terms, and showing one of the animated videos from the Creative Library. Day two was the more fun day with hands-on activity. So for both elementary school and middle school, we concentrated on North Dakota geology and rock layers, basic concepts for 4th and 5th graders, and a little bit more in depth for the middle schoolers. And at the high school level, it was more of a deep dive discussion into the economics, the energy industry's impact on North Dakota economics, what that means to people in their communities, even the school system. And so once we developed learning concepts and activities for these different grade levels, AI was once again really helpful in developing things like the details, the materials list, the breakdown of steps, and even defining timing to put to each step within the lesson. Another aspect that took us some time to really wrap our heads around was how to develop a 2-year social media plan with visuals. We had to make it specific and easy enough to run with for whoever in the future was going to implement the social media portion of the plan, but also flexible enough to adapt to evolving event and outreach involvement, political discussions, potential new questions and concerns that maybe surface during engagement efforts, and even world news and events. So we took a 2-step approach to social media planning. First, we created what you see here is a month-by-month theme with content suggestions that are paired with overall concepts like safety, North Dakota heritage, industry impact, even seasonal recognitions like Energy Awareness Month. We then took it to the next level, and we drafted content and created visuals for every week of that 2-year span. And we tweaked each version for Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. The idea here was to provide an easy copy and paste format for those weekly contents with the flexibility to adapt based on timelines, and by looking back at monthly themes and those suggested content options, if they needed to adjust or pivot, there was also, they could fall back on that as needed.
So as I've mentioned earlier, one of our project's key deliverables was to develop that plan to provide ongoing education and outreach on CO2 initiatives. The scope of our part of this project ends in June of this year. So we built that plan in a way that it could be implemented going into the next biennium, essentially from June 2025 to June 2027. To do this, we developed a very detailed month-by-month recommendation plan for implementation. That plan each month outlined all of the tools and strategies that could be used. It identified themes for each month. It identified different touch point opportunities with the public and really broke down, okay, here is your tool set. here is how you can start using that tool set each month moving forward, who you might want to get in front of, how you might want to disseminate those messages. This slide shows just kind of a snapshot of the first few months of recommendations. But again, we built this matrix out to incorporate themes and touch points and potential advertising for the full 24 months of the next biennium. Oops, sorry. We also broke the plan recommendations down into owned, earned, and paid media, providing that inventory of the assets that we created as part of the project, or other assets that the state of North Dakota already has at their disposal that can be used for messaging, recommendations for press and partnership and some of those earned media opportunities, and then also some high-level budgeting for some potential paid advertising as part of a implementation campaign. The plan also includes 3 tiers of investment options for the state to consider, with tier 1 really focusing primarily on the owned and earned media at a lower cost investment, tier 2 introducing a level of paid media, and tier 3 providing cost estimates for what a full-scale 2-year paid media plan would look like, in addition to those owned and earned media challenges or channels, excuse me. So ultimately, with all of this information that we pulled together, we hope that the plan will result in the Industrial Commission's desired outcomes for this project of, again, creating that better understanding of CO2 and North Dakota's role, building trust, and ultimately helping preserve and enhance North Dakota's way of life. So what are the next steps in all of this? Unfortunately, we're not yet 100% sure. So I mentioned earlier that our scope included the development of this plan and the materials, with the intention of turning all of these assets back over to the Industrial Commission for implementation. This project, when it kicked off last year, it was a really high priority for former Governor Burgum. And with the changes in the governorship, as well as some changes that we've seen at the Industrial Commission staff level, it's not quite clear at this moment if implementation of this is actually going to run through the Industrial Commission going forward. Our most recent conversations surrounding this has been with the Industrial Commission has been about working to transition at the end of our scope all of this information, the work that's been done, back to the Energy Research Councils, who appropriated the funding for this, and give them the ownership of all of this information and be able to allow them to move forward with implementing things. But we're really still working on determining who's going to be the primary quarterback of all of this information going forward and help moving this project into implementation. So we're continuing to work on completing all of our deliverables. We're still working with the Industrial Commission on kind of a transition plan for when our scope concludes. And we remain optimistic that we'll have a group or groups of people within the research councils or within some entity of the state that will take all this information and the work that we pulled into it and be able to utilize it going forward, because we'd love to see it be put to use. So I think that concludes our formal presentation, but happy to answer any questions that people might have.
This was really great. Thank you both. This was just really fascinating, and just what a, for lack of a better term, monster of a campaign for you guys to crank out all that collateral and all that research. That is just phenomenal. So kudos to you. I agree, $300,000 was a bargain. I mean, really. I know I was just chatting with another member here on the personas. We found that just fascinating. So if you have anything to add on that, or I know you guys used Esri data, and I was thinking maybe even that potentially could even be using census data or
Yeah, Esri has a portion of it called Business Analyst, and it pulls in several different census data and other data points they have a whole list of sources and they pull it all together for you. So it can be a monster. It's a fun deep dive. And then you pair that with AI and you really can create, you can create people. I mean, now you can even put an image to them if you wanted to and a voice, but it was a fun deep dive into kind of learning about different areas and different personalities within certain regions.
Wow, that's great. Anyone else have questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and
Join
shoot
our
them.
chaos for the past year.
No other questions, guys?
Hopefully we didn't put everybody to sleep.
What I have another one. Did you run into any like direct feedback from citizens in regards to this? And you know, good or bad, and did you handle those like on an individual basis or just try to incorporate that into your FAQs the best you could? Or
Yeah, so again, I mentioned the feedback forum. I wouldn't say we got an overwhelming amount of people that have responded to that, but we had a good handful of people that have provided comments and feedback. That was set up to be anonymous, so people didn't have to put names to it. So that feedback we did try to just incorporate. Okay, like, yep, we've heard this concern multiple times, or oh, okay, this is something new we hadn't heard before. Let's look into this and see if how we incorporate that. We have had Brent Bolgar, who's not on this call, but he's another one of our colleagues here at AE2S. He's our government affairs specialist. So he spends a lot of time up at the Capitol with legislators and with citizens that are there at the Capitol talking about some of these different topics. So I know he has had some individual conversations with both legislators and just general citizens, kind of talking through questions that they have, about our project and about CO2 in general. And then I mentioned Western Dakota Energy, who is one of our sub-consultants on this project. They kind of represent the energy producing counties in the western part of the state. I know that Jeff Simon there has had conversations with folks. Scott Hennon has had conversations with folks. So it has primarily been individual. We had talked about early on in this project as to whether or not we wanted to do a group kind of town hall Q&A on this, but we kind of discovered that there were a lot of those that had already taken place, especially specifically related to Summit. And we were able to glean a lot of information from those, either through recordings or transcripts, and kind of identify all those questions that we ultimately, for right or wrong, better or for worse, decided, maybe that's not the best setting to try and gather all of this information, because we're likely to hear just the same things repeated that we already have. So that was a decision we made early on. And again, whether that was the right or wrong decision, I guess, is up for debate.
Sure. I was at the North Dakota League of Cities, which is really catered to city administration and leadership in that area. And we did have, so NDSU had a presentation about carbon capture initiatives at that event. And we did have one person that came to that presentation with a handout and kind of worked the crowd to share his opposition to any future work in CO2 initiatives. His handout had a lot of inaccurate information, but I don't believe anybody got into discussions with that person, but we did have all these materials with us, so we could also provide the things that we had researched to that audience as well, and they could make their own decision.
Any other questions? All right, well, we'll let you guys get about 10 minutes back to your day. Really appreciate this. There were quite a few people I know that are in other meetings going on today. We're just down to the last few days of session in the state. So I did record this, and I will send the recording link out to all who registered, and it'll be available to you also, Raquel, and whoever signed up for it. So appreciate this very much. It was fascinating. I'm sure I'll still be coming up with questions as the as the week goes on. So
And absolutely, if others have questions or things pop up or want to talk through anything, feel free to reach out to Raquel or myself.
yeah, I can't wait to dig into that website. So, but thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all.
Okay.